Have you ever felt as if you were standing inside a familiar room only to discover that everything within it had vanished, leaving you with nothing but emptiness and a silence so heavy it almost crushed your chest? That very moment you realize the most painful thing in life is not never having something, but having it once and watching it slip away, and you stand powerless as the fragments scatter from your hands. This is where the real story begins. I have met many people who carry in their hearts a deep regret, an opportunity gone, like a train that passed the station while you only caught a glimpse of the last light disappearing into the dark. A friend or loved one who departed, leaving a hollow space that nothing else could fill. A dream once thought to last a lifetime, but which faded away like a candle burned down. These losses resemble a shattered mirror. You might try to piece it back together, but you will never see a whole reflection again. When a person falls into this state, they often conclude it is too late. There is no return. Time has sealed the door, and the feeling is like being locked in a room from the outside. You knock, you call out, but no answer comes. The world outside moves on while you remain trapped in shadow. Yet, if we stop here, life is nothing but an unfinished song cut in the middle, a story abandoned before its conclusion. The truth is that none of us simply endure loss without secretly longing for more. Deep inside, there is always a question that lingers. Could there be a hand strong enough to touch the ruins and bring order again? Could what has been lost somehow be restored, or at least transformed into something better? And that question is not only a wound, it is also an invitation to a different journey. Because if you look only at what is broken, you will think your story has ended. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, are you certain the period you see is truly the end? Or could it be a colon, opening into something you have not yet imagined? I believe that every fragment of life never lies still upon the ground. They wait for a hand powerful enough to arrange them in an entirely new pattern. Not the old mirror glued together, but a mosaic carrying a beauty never seen before. And if you dare allow the story to continue, you will find that loss is not the last line on the page. It is the blank space that sets the stage for a new chapter. You see, if we only stare at the ruins of what has been lost, life begins to feel like a closed book, the kind you put back on the shelf with no intention of opening again. But I must ask you, what if you are mistaken? What if the ending you see is not a full stop, but merely a pause, a breath before the sentence continues? Have you ever wondered how often we label something as finished, simply because we cannot imagine another outcome? And yet the author of life is never bound by our limited vocabulary of despair. This is where the story begins to turn. And it is here that I want to invite you into a moment of honesty. I ask you directly, are you ready to believe that your life can be more than a tale of loss? That the pages ahead might still hold sentences richer than the ones behind you, if somewhere deep inside you whisper yes? Even if it is faint, I would love for you to mark that decision, not for me, but for yourself. Type the words "I'm ready," or, if it feels easier, simply write the number 1. Why do I ask this of you? You might wonder, because when you speak it out, even in the small act of pressing keys, you make visible the desire within you, and desire has always been the first spark of change. I do not want this to be a monologue drifting into the void of the internet. I long to know that you are here, that your presence is real, that this conversation is alive between us. For the one who creates Knowing that someone is truly listening is not just encouraging, it is sacred. It means that words are not wasted, that they have found a heart to land upon. So I thank you in advance, not merely for responding, but for daring to admit you are hungry for restoration. Do you realize what such an admission means? It means that the tide has already begun to turn. You have moved from silence into confession, from passive longing into active choice. And choices, however small, are what build a different tomorrow. Think of it like a seed planted in soil. The seed itself is tiny, almost insignificant. But buried beneath the surface, it carries within it the entire blueprint of a tree. When you write "I'm ready," or even just the number 1, it is such a seed, hidden now, but destined to break through the ground. In its season, this is not manipulation. It is invitation. The kind that respects your freedom yet urges you to take hold of it. And in your response, no matter how simple, you tell me that I am not alone in speaking. You tell me that your heart is awake and that you have chosen to believe that a different kind of story is possible. For that, I am deeply grateful. More than words can capture, there is a reason why the gospel never flatters human optimism but pierces it. It drags us to the edge of hopelessness, only to show that the edge is where Christ steps in. And no passage in Scripture makes this clearer than the story of the man who lived among the tombs. He was not merely troubled, he was consumed, his mind shattered, his body marked by stones, his nights filled with screams that no one could silence. Society had given up on him. Chains could not hold him. Pity could not reach him. He was the kind of figure that made others avert their eyes, a reminder that some lives seem beyond redemption. Yet the text tells us that when he saw Jesus from a distance, something shifted. Darkness recognized light and trembled. With a word, torment ceased. With a word, dignity returned. With a word, peace that had been impossible suddenly clothed him like a garment. What human power could not do in years was accomplished in a moment when Christ entered the scene. I invite you to let that disturb you, for it dismantles the quiet lie that says certain conditions are permanent, that certain people are unreachable, that certain stories are over. The second account is even more unnerving, because death itself is not just a symbol, it is the final reality to us. The one enemy no mind can reason with. And yet Christ took the hand of a little girl who had died and spoke, "Little one, rise." And she did. Breath filled her lungs again. Steps returned to her feet. Her parents watched life undo the finality of death before their very eyes. I want you to feel the weight of this, not as a gentle tale from a distant age, but as a direct confrontation with the assumptions you carry. We believe in limits. We construct them around our wounds and say, here is where it ends. Yet Scripture paints a different picture, one that makes us shiver, because it dares to say there is no such thing as beyond his reach. When Christ steps into the graveyard is no longer a place of endings, but the stage for resurrection. When he steps into a mind tormented by forces unseen, the madness gives way to clarity. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is the very substance of the gospel. You see, what unsettles us most is not only that he did these things, but that he still does them. That means your despair is not secure. Your chains are not permanent. Your verdict is not final. It means that even the places you have already buried with a stone and walked away from may yet hear a voice that calls them back to life. So I ask you, do you truly want God to be this kind of restorer? Because if you do, you must let go of the safety of resignation. You must be willing to see ruins as the very soil in which He proves His power. The world will tell you that certain things cannot be undone, but the gospel is not polite to the world. It contradicts it at the deepest level, and that contradiction is your only hope. When I speak of the words of Christ, I do not speak as one who stands apart, but as one who has listened long to stories of those who walked with Him. And the more I listen, the more I realize how easily we reduce the gospel into a harmless tale, when in truth it is anything but harmless. Let me tell you one such story that was whispered through the ages. The moment when the crowd pressed in so tightly around Him that it seemed impossible for anyone to even catch His eye. And yet one woman dared to believe that even if she touched only the edge of His cloak, something could change. She had lived 12 long years in isolation, her body betraying her, her dignity stripped away, her hope worn down by countless failed remedies. Do you feel the weight of 12 years? 12 years of doors closed, of prayers unanswered, of being called unclean again and again. And yet, on that day, she reached, trembling, desperate, but certain enough to risk everything. The text tells us that power left Him, and He turned not with anger but with a question. Who touched me? It was not that He did not know. It was that He wanted her to step into the light, to no longer hide in shame. She fell before Him and confessed. And He spoke, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Now, here is where I must ask you something. Do you not see yourself in her story? In those hidden places where you have stopped asking because disappointment has worn grooves into your soul? What if the act of reaching, even quietly, even secretly, could be the very thing that draws His attention? And here is where I ask of you, let me know if you are listening. Comment even a single word. Let me know that this longing for change still beats within you. For when you respond, it is not for me alone. It is an act of courage. It is a declaration that you have not given up. I thank you deeply for that. More than you can know. Now remember, this was not just a physical healing. It was the restoration of her identity, the lifting of her shame, the undoing of 12 years of silence. And if He did this for her, do you believe He will not also meet you in your need? The gospel insists that He sees, and that nothing is too hidden, nothing is too small, nothing is too ruined. Think for a moment, what if you carried your secret wounds into His presence? What if you dared to reach? Would you be willing to believe that His answer might be more than you expect? It is here that we face our greatest challenge. Not the greatness of our suffering, but the smallness of our faith. And yet, Christ never demanded grandeur, only a trembling touch, only a whispered cry. That is why this story is not ancient history, but living truth. And so I ask again, are you ready to reach? To not only hear, but to answer, to declare that you are present in this moment? Then let me see it. Let me hear it. Leave your mark. So I know you are here. So I know I am not speaking into the void. For every voice matters. Every presence is a gift. And I am grateful beyond words for yours. A moment in the gospel that never ceases to silence me. It is the story of when Christ stood before the storm, not in fear, not in confusion, but with an authority so calm that the winds themselves obeyed. The disciples were seasoned men of the sea. They had weathered many storms, yet that night their strength was broken, and fear gripped them as the waves threatened to swallow their boat. Do you see the picture? The furious sea, the cries of men, and yet in the midst of it all, Christ asleep, his head resting, as if he trusted the Father even in the chaos. They woke him with voices filled with desperation. "Lord, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he rose, not hurried, not shaken, but steady. He spoke, "Peace, be still," and creation bowed to its maker. What follows is not simply a miracle of weather, but a revelation of authority. And it is here that the real challenge lies for us. For how often do we cry out in panic, convinced that he is silent, that he is absent, when in truth he is in the boat all along? What if the test was never the storm itself, but whether we could trust the one who commands it? This story does not let us rest in comfort. It asks us hard questions. Do you believe he is who he says he is, even when your world roars against you? Do you trust his timing when the waves are already at your feet? Yet in the midst of its challenge, it offers a deep peace. For if Christ is Lord over wind and sea, then he is also Lord over the unrest within your soul. I find it striking that he rebuked the storm, but also turned to his disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" It was not condemnation, but invitation, a call to see with new eyes, to understand that fear cannot coexist with the fullness of trust. And here is the gentle truth. He does not promise us a life without storms, but he does promise us his presence within them. The disciples learned that night that safety is not the absence of danger, but the nearness of Christ. This is the heart of the gospel. Not escape from suffering, but transformation within it. Not the removal of struggle, but the assurance that nothing can overcome the one who walks with him. And as I reflect, I realize that the storms in our lives, the betrayals, the losses, the shadows that we cannot seem to shake, are not signs of his abandonment, but opportunities to see him clearer. He waits for us to wake him, though he was never truly asleep. For in our cry we reveal our need, and in his answer we discover his power. It is here that faith grows, not in calm harbors, but in tempests where every anchor is tested. And still, his voice cuts through with the same words, "Peace, be still." Those words are for the storm, yes, but they are also for you. They are spoken into restless hearts, into anxious minds, into nights that seem without end. And when you let them sink into you, when you allow his authority to rest upon your fears, you will find a peace that does not make sense, a peace not of this world. That is the beauty and the challenge of walking with Christ. For he asks us not to merely admire the miracle, but to live as though it is true. And if you dare to trust him in the storm, you may just discover that the storm was never the final word, but his presence always was. It is the night when Jesus walked on the water. The sea was raging. The wind was violent. The disciples were exhausted from rowing, and terror had already wrapped itself around them. Then, in the middle of that storm, in the thickest darkness, they saw him approaching, not in a boat, not with human strength, but walking upon the very waves that threatened to destroy them. Imagine it, the sea, which has always been the place of human frailty and helplessness, became a pathway beneath his feet. Yet the first response of the disciples was not joy, but fear. They thought he was a ghost. And here lies something unnerving. Why is it that when grace appears, the human heart so often trembles, doubts, recoils? Perhaps because we have grown so accustomed to shadows that light feels unbearable. Then Jesus spoke, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." Those words did not merely soothe panic. They unveiled a truth. His presence is sufficient to alter the way we face every danger. Then Peter, caught in a moment of reckless desire, but also deep longing, said, "Lord, if it is truly you, command me to come to you on the water." At the command, "Come," he stepped out of the boat, setting his feet upon what could never hold him. And as long as his eyes were fixed on Christ, the impossible became reality. But the moment he turned to the wind, fear rushed in, and he began to sink. This, I believe, is the picture of faith itself. It is not found in the courage we muster, but in the gaze we keep. To believe is not blind self-confidence. It is fastening the whole weight of your being upon the one who calls. When Peter cried out, "Lord, save me," immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. There was no delay, no hesitation, only the firm grasp of a Savior who does not let go. Then came the question, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" That question is not only for Peter, it is for all of us who start with hope but collapse when storms roar. Yet even in those collapses, his hand is not withdrawn. This is the mystery. Our weakness is never strong enough to make him abandon us, but it is often the very stage upon which his power shows itself more clearly. The story is not a spectacle of miracle alone. It is a summons. If you wish to discover what freedom is, you must dare to step out of the boat, for the boat, however solid it feels, is a fragile safety. The waves, however threatening they seem, may be the very place where his nearness is revealed. The paradox is this: only by abandoning false security do we encounter the one true anchor. I do not recount this to add another tale of wonder to your memory, but to remind you that even now his voice still says, "Come." And so the question remains, will you step out, or will you cling to the wood that cannot keep you? For often what you fear to lose is the very thing that keeps you from finding life itself. In the gospel, where the question is not only what Jesus did, but what he stirred within those who followed him. And one of those moments is when he asked, "Who do you say that I am?" It was not an abstract puzzle. It was the decisive turning point of their lives. For if he were only a teacher, they could admire him. But if he were truly the Christ, then everything had to change. Their hopes, their loyalties, even their willingness to suffer. When Peter declared, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," he was not reciting a line he had memorized. He was voicing the confession that separated darkness from light, despair from hope. Yet notice, even after such a bold proclamation, Peter would falter, deny, stumble. And still, the Lord did not cast him aside, but restored him, entrusted him with the charge to feed his sheep. The lesson is unsettling, and yet liberating. For faith is not the achievement of perfect strength, but the courage to return, again and again, to the one who knows our frailty and still calls us his own. So I ask you, not as a distant narrator, but as one who has wrestled with his own doubts, who do you say he is? Do you see him as a figure confined to history, or do you dare to recognize him as the living presence who still asks for your heart? This question is not comfortable. It never was. And it should not be, because it pierces through every layer of pretense we wear. And yet, within that discomfort lies the possibility of freedom. If he is who he says he is, then there is no chain that can hold you, no past that can condemn you, no storm that can silence his voice. The only barrier is whether you will remain seated in the familiar safety of your own boat, or whether you will dare to step forward at his command. I want to pause here, because I know this is not simply about stories from long ago. It is about you, right now, listening, weighing, perhaps feeling both the pull of desire and the weight of hesitation. And I would like to know, are you ready to step out, to let go of the old securities, to trust him enough to walk where reason alone would never carry you? If you are, then simply let me know with a comment. Say, I am ready. Or even just the number 1, it may look small, a few letters, a single digit. But do not underestimate what it means, because it is the act of declaring, here and now, that you will not remain where you are. It is not for me, it is for you. Yet I must confess, as one who shares these words, it matters deeply to know I am not speaking into silence, that there are hearts listening, hearts awakened, hearts willing to move. That knowledge is precious, beyond measure, because it reminds me that the work of telling his story is not in vain. So I ask you once more, with honesty, what holds you back? And what would it cost to release it? If the answer frightens you, good. Because faith is never born in the absence of fear. It is forged in the act of stepping forward despite it. The Lord has already spoken his word. Come. And the waves that once threatened to swallow, you may yet become the very ground upon which you walk. Will you answer him today? Will you dare to declare it even with something as simple as a word or a number? The choice lies before you, as it did before Peter, as it has before every soul who has heard his call. And perhaps, just perhaps, your reply will mark the beginning of a journey you never thought possible. You have carried questions that no sermon could silence and no distraction could bury. And perhaps the greatest of them is this: if God is real, if Christ truly walked among us, why then does my pain still remain? Why does the silence of unanswered prayers weigh heavier than the promises I have heard? I tell you not as a philosopher, but as a witness, that the wound itself is often the very place where his presence enters. For when the disciples despaired, when the tomb was sealed and all hope seemed lost, that was the very hour when resurrection was prepared. It was not comfort that saved them. It was not ease. It was the power of a risen Lord who conquered death by passing through it, not around it. The same is true for you. Your suffering does not disprove his love. It may be the very proof that you are not left to yourself, that he has chosen to meet you where the world would abandon you. The sharpest sorrow can be the soil of the deepest transformation, but only if you dare to place it in his hands. So let me ask you directly, what would it mean if your very struggle, the one that has kept you awake in the night, became the doorway to a faith that could no longer be shaken? Would you still see your weakness as a curse? Or would you begin to see it as the place where his strength is revealed? You do not need to pretend to be whole. You need only to be willing to be found. And here lies the challenge. Will you continue to search for hope where it has never been, or will you allow yourself to be surprised by a God who is nearer than you believed? I do not speak to stir your emotions for a moment. I speak because your eternity rests upon this choice. And every delay is itself a decision. The Lord still asks, as he once asked his disciples, "Will you also leave me?" And the answer cannot be borrowed. It cannot be inherited. It must rise from your own heart. If you long for more, if you sense even now that there is truth hidden in the very ache you carry, then stay with me. For the journey is not ending. It is only beginning. What awaits in the next telling is not another story for your curiosity, but a call that may demand more of you than you thought you could give, yet will return to you more than you ever dreamed you could receive. So I urge you, do not drift back into the noise. Do not soothe yourself with empty comforts. Remain with the question. Wrestle with it. Let it disturb you until it drives you to seek the one who alone can answer it. The pain you feel is not the final word. The silence you fear is not the end of the story. And the next step may very well be the moment when the light breaks through. Are you prepared to discover what that step reveals? Then come with me to what lies ahead.